All right, so I've got 105, and let's kick off. So welcome everybody. Brad Smith, current president of the ACG Kentucky Chapter. On behalf of the board, I want to welcome you to our, third installment of our virtual sessions. We started this journey together back in April, had another one in May, and then we added this for June. So to really close out our program year. So Terry, you want to go to the next slide? So just, you've seen, if you've been with us before, we just want to, again, always take time to say thank you to our sponsors, long-standing sponsors that help support the chapter and allow us to accomplish what we do on an annual basis. ADP, BKD, Denton's, MCM, and I've lost the other one, Weller, sorry, Kim Berryman for that. So, and then the next, we have a group of virtual table sponsors in today's world. You've seen these with EMY, Strothman, Vaco, Old National, and Todd Asset Management. Again, longstanding supporters of our chapter, along with our corporate sponsors, our educational sponsor, and our longtime media sponsor, Louisville Business First, who's always been supportive of highlighting the chapter. A couple of announcements, and I don't know if Darren is with us. Darren, are you with us? Don't see you in the participant listing. So a couple things just to highlight. If you remember on the right of this screen on the Mid-South, you remember if you were with us in May that we co-sponsor with the Tennessee chapter the Mid-South Capital Connection on an annual basis. This year, in 2020, we were scheduled to be in Tennessee with the current events. Obviously, we unfortunately had to cancel that. You saw that announcement if you had registered before. So we're leapfrogging to 2021. We'll be back in Louisville for that standpoint. So we'll get some save the dates out early in the fall, but look forward to seeing everybody in Louisville next June. Then we're still moving forward with our traditional golf event. We're setting August 31st as the date of the event. That's the Monday of Derby week in 2020. As strange as that might sound, that Derby week's kicking off on August 31st. So should be an exciting time. It's always a great event. Again, we'll be back out at the University of Louisville Cardinal Club. Darren McCauley, who's been the longstanding golf chair for the chapter, will once again be leading that effort. So you'll start hearing from Darren, both from a participant standpoint as well as a sponsoring standpoint. So more details to come as we learn more details from both what's happening with the Cardinal Club, what's happening here in the state of Kentucky, and then with the event itself. So be on the lookout for that, and look forward to a great event that really is kind of a kickoff event, kind of wraps up our chapter year in, but also kicks off the next chapter year for us in a fun fashion. So again, we're excited to kind of close out the chapter year with today's panelists, representing actually three of our longstanding sponsors and supporters of the chapter. If you go back to April, we were about 3 or 4 weeks into this new world that we're living in today as it relates to the economic challenges. And we had a panel that talked about what it looked like on the front end. Now, as we're starting to move out in different stages, depending on where you're at and what piece of the economy you're at, we thought it was appropriate to talk about reopening and what's next. So Dan Fisher's with Denton's, Stephen Martin with BKD, and Shushma Tripathi from ADP. They're going to share some insights from their respective positions in the market as it relates to that topic. And then again, we'll have questions at the end. So I think Dan's going to be up first. And with that, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Brad. And thank you to all for joining us. My name again is Dan Fisher. I'm with Denton's Bingham Greenbaum and have been there, not in Denton's obviously, but with Greenbaum, Donald McDonald, and Bingham Denton's Greenbaum ever since 1986 with a 2-year hiatus. But so I've been practicing for 34 years, primarily in corporate M&A and healthcare areas, and have the privilege of serving as the co-chair of the National Denton's Healthcare Team. And in a subgroup of our business services, I'm the co-chair of our mergers and acquisition team as well. So as to the topic, I guess I'm sitting here wondering what is the new normal and how is that affecting us as we open up? I don't know if I completely believe that my life as an attorney has totally turned upside down from the standpoint of my practice, other than the fact that I'm sitting in my man cave, or otherwise known as a garage, with a beard and not with a suit and tie on, but instead coming to you from this lovely location. But as far as the fundamentals of practicing, I guess when I go back to it, there's just core principles in our practices of being diligent, being informed, keeping on top of things that are not changing, but certainly the facts on the ground are. And I do want to sort of start up by just saying, hey, we are living in unprecedented times. It goes without saying. I think when we started this presentation, we were worried about COVID-19 and its impact on our families, job, and community. But I have to say that perhaps a larger looming issue, and we're just growing through it, is how are we going to redress and satisfy social, racial, and economic inequalities in our neighborhoods, community, and throughout our country. You know, I was feeling really good about we're getting control of the COVID-19 and we're opening up and everybody's focusing on that. And then we have this social unrest. So I, like you, am concerned about this may delay our comeback or not. But anyway, given everything that's happened, there's going to be likely an uptick, although I'm not a scientist. It probably will further delay our recovery a little bit, but I'm confident we will adapt and as a society be able to open up. And I know we can social distance, wear masks, and so on. And I certainly hope that our scientists you know, are able to come up with a vaccine and means to redress the pandemic. At Denton's, we have many, many resources to help you with opening up, as does DKD and ADP, and I would suspect many of your companies do as well, all of which will assist in helping to open up. I think the bigger challenge, and I'm going to just say it once again, that presents us is how we as a society will address these social and racial inequalities, and that is one that I hope ACG Kentucky and our business community is ready to sort of head and hit right up front. Topics for future discussion, perhaps. What are we doing at Denton's now, or what do we foresee? First, I'm going to go back to the racial inequalities and social inequities and just say that high on our priorities, if not the #1 priority at Denton's, is to address diversity in our workplace. And every hiring decision, every staffing decision, responses to RFPs and otherwise, I think you all have experienced this too, but we are focused on diversity, increasing women, increasing minority participation. And I think our incoming class in Louisville, at least, is 50% women and 40% diverse. So it's quite a change from when I started in 1986. As to other opening, you know, we're openly trying to share our time and talents as it relates to the current pandemic. We have a COVID-19 hub on our Denton's website, and I highly recommend it to each one of you. This hub is an outstanding resource that can assist you, your clients, if you're an employee, your employers, to navigate through these times. You'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces on the hub, and we feel that the market, in fact, I think we may have oversaturated the market, but essentially, you know, this has been in some odd way, a real opportunity presented, and that sounds very bad, but we just entered into this combination with Denton's and also Denton's, Cohen and Grigsby, and this pandemic has really united us towards reaching out, cooperating and coordinating and integrating much more than we otherwise would have. And so we're excited about that. I guess I want to point out a few things that on that hub, though, that I think will be very helpful to you in reopening. And I think, Terry, yes, you have it up. One of the items we have is a 50-state tracker that looks at all the various orders and directives, restrictions, and other information that's happening throughout the 50 states in the United States. This is a quick access to every state and the large municipalities that are within those states that gives you up-to-date information on these orders and regulations and otherwise. You can go to the next screen as well. We've also put out just recently, and it's available on our COVID-19 hub, a return to work toolkit, and you can find that and download that. I don't want to get into any of the depth in this, but just to tell you that this is another resource that we have. But also importantly, this COVID-19 hub is very helpful to anyone who wants to go on it with all the material. We have information on competitiveness analysis, all the updates on competition laws that might affect your M&A. We have information on available incentives and stimulus that are available throughout the United States to various companies as they open up and decide to take advantage of what's available. So this is in much more detail than I've seen traditionally. And we also are going behind this and updating on a much more, for clients on a specific engagement, we will go through and have successfully in very short times, because of our depth and breadth, been able to address all the stimulus and loan packages that are sort of hidden, that are being offered by municipalities where our clients are working, as well as in those states. So it's something that's very, very helpful, I think, to anyone who wants to stay informed. Unfortunately, I've looked on the site. Kentucky and Indiana do not have any specific programs. They're located in states that have the resources primarily, or municipalities. But nevertheless, if you have clients, or if you and your company have operations throughout the country, there's a substantial amount of information we can provide to you gratis through this website. Let's see what else. How have we been impacted? I mean, we've been very busy. I would say that more nationally perhaps than regionally, but I think that we're finding that our labor attorneys and our restructuring attorneys, who are supported by our mergers and acquisition professionals, are just crazy busy right now. You know, we are, like many of you, I'm sure, are focused on the health and safety of our clients and their employees, you know, having a safe workplace and searching for resources to deal with short-term liquidity, whether that be through the Paycheck Protection Program or other available means, such as, you know, municipalities and states. We're now turning to what is the Main Street Lending Program that's being offered by the Boston Federal Reserve, that's going to make money available to some of the larger companies, those that are not necessarily in the smaller qualifications that qualified for the PPP funds. So that is an area of focus that we're very active in, to make sure people have the short-term liquidity that they need to operate. I think we are at a time that most of my clients and most of the people who applied for PP funds, they did so right off the bat, and was in early to mid-April that they received their funds. We've all lived through the various changes and changes in position and ever-evolving laws and rules coming out of the government. And obviously we're staying on top of that. But I think through all of this, we've focused on helping our clients not only understand whether they qualify, but also making sure they properly document their decision making as to those funds that they applied for. So if later questioned, and which they will if they have over 2 million, they have the ability to show what they relied upon at the time of making those decisions. Let's see, we're focused on being prepared to address and, when appropriate, take advantage of financial distress in the business community. I think it doesn't take much to foresee that we're going to have many businesses that are going to have a lot of financial distress coming out of this. And in that regard, I want to emphasize today that the businesses, while they must keep an eye on short-term liquidity and safety issues, they also must be simultaneously revisiting capital budgets and strategic plans as well. And so we're working actively with boards of directors to ensure that they're exercising appropriate fiduciary duties, especially their duties of care and oversight over the operation and strategic needs of their company. And to that end, we've been recommending to boards that they, realistically evaluate their competitive strengths and weaknesses at this time. Not just focus on the short term, but focus on the long-term game as well, and whether they're going to be survivors or not, and those that may or may not. So we ask them to evaluate and be informed as to the effect of the pandemic on threats that they are seeing today to their industry, threats to their competitors, their customers, what's happening to their supply chain, workforce, and other resources they have, and ask them to, really pull out and evaluate your contracts, your leases, loan instruments, bond indentures, anything that's key to you, key employee contracts, and make sure you're on top of those and understand your rights and have a strategy to deal with that. I know that you're going to face short-term and modest liquidity problems, or our clients are going to. They're going to have short-term potential. I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that I sort of got ahead of myself here. What I'm trying to bring to everyone is to understand, do that detailed analysis, figure out your strategic plan. If you find you have liquidity problems, they may be short-term, or you may only have a short-term breach of financial covenants. And in those cases, we're working with clients to seek waivers or forbearance from whoever might be the counterparty to their contract, whether it be a landlord or a lender. There's others that we're seeing, and we have had an uptick in severe, liquidity or financial covenant breaches, or those have been they have no other option but to seek some type of remedy to sell inside or outside of bankruptcy. And so I guess the bottom line is it's time for boards to think where they are, to understand strategically what's the long term, start making plans, and be proactive and well informed. And that's really what boards are responsible for doing at this time, is to be informed. That's part of their duty of care and oversight. You don't have to be perfect, but your decisions have to be made on an informed basis and in reliance on professionals and other persons you believe bring to you the talents to help you fulfill and understand where you are today in this ever evolving and changing times. Some will have to, and we expect an uptick in M&A, and to that effect, we're holding seminars to update all of our employees on how you buy businesses in distressed business sales. We're preparing and coordinating with our clients to plan. We're actively involved. I've personally been involved in 2 different bankruptcies already. Not saying that they were brought on by COVID-19, so I expect others to come up. But one was interesting in California. I'll just mention it. It was a hospital that was in bankruptcy, and creatively the state came to them and saved this organization by offering to convert their hospital into a overflow COVID-19 resource or response for fixed fees. So there's a lot of different deals and opportunities out there. So stay informed, I guess my short message to you is, hey, to the extent our COVID-19 hub can be a helpful resource, and I think you'll find it is really greatly in depth and gets you into any issue, at least to start the analysis, do so. Anyway, with that, I want Steve to address, he's got some ideas on effective planning strategies in business.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dan. You actually took some of my thunder, but I'll maybe try to frame it a little bit differently. My name is Steve Martin, talking to you from my kitchen. I think that's the world we live in. I'm a transaction services partner with BKD, primarily doing lower middle market deals. We have about 50 folks in our group and do about 250 deals a year. And I will say we are actually living through a time, at least in my career, as you see, gray hair or no hair. I thought I had seen it all, as being exposed to 87 and 2001 and 2008, and what I would say is I think this event has actually been significantly different, and it's actually been inconsistently different, and it's also hit us much different than all the other downturns. Every other downturn has had a gradual nature to it, where we've kind of retrenched, and as such, people were beginning to plan for those things and plan for issues that would affect things like liquidity. Whereas, this is an event where we've really, had to basically help people plan kind of on the fly. And so when the topic was given, reopening, what's next, I felt like responding, gosh, I wish I knew what was next. Every time that we begin to think that we have a handle on what's going on, actually the facts and circumstances change. Which actually gets really to my central point here. What you have in front of you is something I'm calling the problem horizon. As we've worked with our clients, our buyers, and also companies that actually are our own client base that are just struggling financially, what we're trying to do is trying to get them to think proactively and plan proactively. And you really need to think about it in tranches of time. So what are the problems I'm going to face 2 weeks out, in the next quarter, and in the next year? And in the process, try to put a planning framework around it. But one of the things that we've, as we've helped our clients, one of the things that we've instilled is, whatever you do, your planning process needs to be dynamic. I've heard people talk about best case, mid case, and worst case. So is this a V? Is this a swoosh? Is this an L? I think probably to a certain extent, at least the jobs news last week would lead us to believe that it's going to be a little quicker recovery. But as I said, the jury is still out. And back to what Dan said, I think there is there's an unevenness in how this is going to affect people, depending on geographically where they're located, what segments they're in, what their supply chain looks like. So there are so many different things that cause this event to actually behave differently amongst different companies, that it's that proactive planning that is really important. So if you could maybe go to the next slide. So when we're talking to a planning process, we really think about it in 3 steps. First is the short term. Now many people have probably already addressed this, but the immediate issue is deciding or defining where your liquidity constraints are. If your companies aren't in the practice of putting together a 13-week cash flow roller, it's a exercise that we encourage. We think all companies should be forecasting their cash flows dynamically over the next 13 weeks, and I'll drill down a little bit about what that might mean. A couple of my other comments. The next step, step 2 here is really building out a dynamic model of your business, a financial model. We talk in terms of a bottom-up economic model. And I think this is really critical, because it's important to not only know what your cash flow requirements are going to be, but you also need to assess what your burn rate is going to be. Are you operating above or below the break even from a cost structure perspective? And the only way you can do that when you have significantly changing volumes, 10%, 20%, 30%, 50% changes in sales volumes, is to build a projection tool that basically is dynamic. And then we get to really, I think the next step, which is probably the central part of this conversation, which is what do we do next? And what we talk to our clients about is how do you begin to pivot? And the pivot really is back to both long-term and short-term planning. What changes is my market going to present me, in the next 12 to 18 months, and what do I need to do to basically alter my my operating strategy to basically um, address those. So if you go to the next slide. I, I always tell people, it's important to be dual-minded when they think through the planning process. I always tell people you look backwards to um, understand what your cost structure is, but you need to continually look forward to figure out what your forecasted volumes are going to be and what changes in the mix that you potentially could present. You also need to be dual-minded as it relates to short-term and long-term. If I wind my own career back in the 90s and 2000s, I did a fair amount of restructuring work and turnaround work. I said I would never do that again, and then all of a sudden this happened. So I think by definition we're kind of all living what will look like in most business circumstances elements of a turnaround process. But in a classic turnaround process, you always need to both simultaneously think of the short term, how do I survive today, and then the long term, what am I surviving to achieve, and what do I need to look like so I can begin to financially succeed, whether that's 6, 12, 18 months from now. And then the last piece, and this sometimes is a little harder advice to give people, when you are looking at the opportunities you're facing, occasionally you need to become a little smaller before you get bigger. I think for years we focused on growth as being the primary objective for most of our strategies. I think there might be a need to actually look at profitability and potentially harvesting profitability, and being okay with being a little smaller before you start to step on a growth strategy. I think in this environment, I think what people tend to do is they get concerned about backlog, and the first thing that many people do is they immediately think about the price dynamics of their own business, and they think if they could cut prices, that might be a way to basically refill volume. And I tell people, fight that urge. You don't generally create demand in a market space, and in that process, what you oftentimes will do is you'll reduce the very contribution margin that generates the cash flow necessary to get through the crisis. So I always tell people, fight the urge to um, uh, uh, cut prices. If you go back to the 13-week roller, I think a lot of people probably have already done this, but I think you need to be very discreet in actually how you organize your planning process. There's usually we usually have 5 elements to it. You have a customer plan. What are our customers going to pay? How are they going to pay? What credit risks do those customers present us? A vendor plan. Unfortunately, if you follow the turnaround playbook, you need to probably think through which are your critical and non-critical vendors, and actually think about, in some cases, when you do have cash flow constraints, who you're going to pay first. The last piece is obviously the labor plan. I suggest that probably most people have actually already gone through their RIF planning, but probably they continue to need to look at their long-term headcount and figure out, what is it going to take to actually get the production done when the demand starts to cycle back up. And so dynamically planning your headcount. And then the next piece, I call this the resource planning. And I harp on this with my clients. I tell people that, or I tell our clients, you need to continually plan your volumes, and then make sure that the planning of the volumes is actually integrated into your purchasing and your production, so that you actually don't get out of sync. The last thing you can do in a situation where you've got scarce resources and scarce operating liquidity is to spend your cash producing products that may not necessarily be things that you'll be selling immediately. And then the last piece, and I'll get back to probably what Dan said, is plan, as you begin to understand what your liquidity issues are going to be, and you know that you're going to have trouble with your banks, you need to be as direct with your lenders as possible. I think there's going to be a lot of people in line as it relates to the default and potential forbearance processes in the next probably 2 to 3 to 4 months as this thing winds itself out. And I think it pays to be user friendly when dealing with the bank, because they're going to have a lot of problems. So I think you need to figure out how to help your bank solve your problems. The next slide. So, I spoke inside of our organization a couple weeks ago, and we talked a little bit about innovation, because I really think that to a certain extent we're going to see a lot of reinvention of companies as they kind of plan forward. Obviously retail has changed, food has changed, but just the basic human interaction and social activities related to business have changed significantly. And so I think it becomes important to evaluate your business kind of holistically and look for where you might have those disconnects in your process that are sometimes going to be people driven. The companies that are succeeding right now have found a way to digitize the significant value the value chains of their business. So if you haven't rethought all those value chains that are people dependent, those actually do represent a significant risk. And the last thing I ask people to do is they're looking through what customers are satisfying, not satisfied. You've got a diagram here. This is a scatter diagram that groups the contribution margin of your products and services. And I always tell people, group your revenues highest to lowest and your contribution margins highest to lowest, and figure out how you're going to satisfy your customers. If you draw your eyes up to the upper left-hand quadrant, those are high volume, low contribution margin customers. I call those resource users. Those are customers you really need to be careful in a downturn because they tend to use cash. And then the upper right hand are where you have customers that have high contribution margin and high volumes. And I think those are the customers that in a dynamic environment probably have value propositions that are not just directed by price. And those are customers that you need to make sure that what you're delivering and how you're delivering those services has been thought through, so that you don't put those those customers at risk. So I've covered a lot of ground as it relates to how we are helping people think through what's next. The most important thing as you plan to reopen is to continually prepare for the unexpected. And the only way that you can prepare for the unexpected is build a process that is flexible, that allows you to dynamically replan your businesses kind of continuously. So,
well, let me quickly introduce myself and then kind of talk a little bit about, from a human capital management perspective, what are some of the things that you should consider. So again, I'm Sushma Tripathi, Vice President at ADP Strategic Advisory Services, and I consult with employers on human capital management strategy. And then, all the different laws that go with that, right? So employment law and wage and hour and, other things that bother employers greatly. So with that, if we move on to the next slide. So, I've been talking to lots and lots of employers, and as I speak with employers, most of them are concerned about keeping the employees safe and getting the employees back to work in a very safe manner. And so that's been the number one concern. However, as we're talking about return to work and reopening, from that perspective, the biggest thought that, from my perspective is that try to evaluate and see, who's working on site, who's working off site. And if the off site is working, meaning your remote work is actually, going smoothly, then why not keep them remote, right? So that's something to evaluate. And then, employers have to consider their logistical challenges, maintaining the proper social distancing and everything that we've been hearing ad nauseum, right? Which rightfully so. And then, some employers, they're considering flexible hours And they're sort of even staggering work weeks, right? One team come in to work and do work, and then another team come in, say maybe the next week, or alternate days, and so on and so forth. So I think some of that is going on. There are other employers that I've spoken with, and they are saying that, we'll just sort of have one cubicle occupied and then leave the next cubicle empty. And so again, each employer is trying to do different things depending on their type of business, and not everybody works in a cubicle. So certainly, that's something to sort of keep in mind as well. Now, the other big thing that when I'm speaking with employers is that because of the nature of job or the nature of business is changing, so are the job duties. And what that means is that, whatever the person might be doing before may or may not be the same thing. So the reason that becomes important is specifically as you're thinking about your non-exempt employees. So obviously exempt employees, not, huge issue around that, except if they start doing a lot of non-exempt responsibilities, because then other wage and hour laws come into effect, and then there's overtime calculation and so on and so forth. So just as something else to kind of keep in mind. And then the other thing is technology, that's played a big role as we all have gone through COVID-19. So along those lines, people are evaluating the pros and cons of using technology. And in fact, if you've seen the recent, Forbes article, they've been talking about Google and Facebook and others who are even considering permanent remote work. Now, certainly not everybody can do that. And, if you're a restaurant or brick and mortar business, and obviously you cannot do that. But again, those are some of the avenues to explore if you're able to do that. And then no matter what you do, it doesn't matter what remedy you're looking for, whether you're looking for people to show up on site or, working remotely, make sure all your actions are blessed by your legal department as well as your employee relations department, because it's not about, just trying to do it right. It's all about not giving the perception of any type of discrimination. So that is a big thing. And so that's just another reminder for employers. So, Terry, moving on to the next slide, there are just a few more other things that employers are keeping in mind. I think both Dan and Steve kind of talked about the different laws, and especially as you think about reopening, but even from an employment law and, legal perspective, there are different ordinances and, different orders and guidance that you have to consider, whether you're looking at local, state, or federal considerations. So again, you have to abide by all of that, and then make sure that you're training your employees on some of the new policies, because now you've had a change, and a lot of people have new safety policies and protocols and rules, including, what you're going to do for compliance. And then the other thing some of the employers I've been speaking with are concerned around is around employee absence and leaves. So, those are another big reasons to, make sure that you're talking to employee relations as well as your legal department, because it depends on whether or not the employee is actually entitled to leave. But not just that, there are different agencies involved. For example, there's the Department of Labor, the EEOC, the ADA, and going through that interactive process to make sure you're making the proper assessment. And then, a lot of employers I've been speaking with, they've actually assigned a team, and it's a multidisciplinary team. And basically that team has been developing, implementing, monitoring, and also been responsible for governance for return to work. And, a lot of people have designated a safety manager or a return to work leader. And sometimes, these folks are from HR, but otherwise they're not necessarily from HR. They could be one, from your operations floor, or a floor manager or a team leader, and what have you. So again, the most important thing and takeaway from all of this is make sure you're communicating with your employees on a regular manner. Make sure you're asking for feedback and, looking at that feedback, and also making sure that you're communicating back to your employees to let them know what you're considering and what you're not, and specifically why you're not considering it. So really being transparent is key. So that's just something to look at. So Terry, if we move on to the next slide, I did want to mention that, so I talked about returning to work and people actually showing up. So the next question I get from employers is, how are you going to handle if the employee refuses to come back to work, right? Because not everybody is going to come back to work. So, what happens then? So this is more of a leave behind for you. So you can take a look at the 7-step process. But in a nutshell, basically, you have to determine the reason, right? Why are they not wanting to come back to work? What's the reason behind it? And then, what type of entitlement do they have in terms of state, local, or federal guidelines, whether it's, the 2 leave types available under the FFCRA, which is your paid sick leave, paid family leave that is available to employers with less than 500 employees, or is it your regular old FMLA? Other state and local disability and sick leave laws apply. So again, taking a look at all of that, is it an accommodation under ADA? And with ADA, I just want to put out a reminder that, physical disabilities are very easy to see. But again, this also, includes mental, meaning psychological issues as well. So again, things may not be very apparent. And then, can your employee who's not wanting to come back to work take just PTO or sick time or vacation time? And, is there a possibility in terms of them working remotely? So how can you as an employer be flexible? Now, once you've exhausted everything, then certainly, that's where dismissal might be the only option. But again, going through your legal counsel to make sure you've explored all avenues is critical. So Terry, moving on to the next slide, another question that I get from employers is around how's the workplace going to change after COVID-19, right? So when you think about that, it's really 2 avenues to consider. Your workers who are on site, depending on the type of business and the industry you're from, and then your remote workers. So let's look at the on-site workers first. Now, certainly everybody I've been speaking to has had new workplace policies and practices. We all talked about social distancing, sanitation, making sure the workstations are spaced differently, plexiglass, other things people are using, the PPE and all of that. And is the PPE just going to be for your employees or also for visitors? And how do you inform everybody? And then, who's going to make that PPE available, meaning who's going to pay for it? And then, what are the rules going to be for elevators, for use of common spaces? People tend to congregate around printers and so on and so forth. As people come back to work, especially if you're in an office building, what about one-way hallways? Is that something you're considering? And then, any types of limitations on access. And then again, sanitizing, the workplace. Are the cleaning people going to be on site during the day too? Because all of us are kind of used to cleaning people in the evening and we generally don't see them. Again, what is going to be the process and protocol to address all of these issues, including if your employees have individual complaints or inquiries? So what are some of those protocols going to be like, and who are they going to go to? And then when you think about remote workers, there are new policies and procedures for them too. For example, virtual meetings and events, just like ours today, we all are obviously connected remotely today. And then, how's the interaction with customers going to look like? So everybody has to think about, how are you going to strike the right balance there? And then, what about setting boundaries? And this one is big, specifically when people, work from home. You can easily just roll out of bed and get to work and not take any break. And I know most of us are probably guilty of that until our spouse or somebody will say, hey, it's time for lunch, or do you want a cup of coffee? So along those lines, I think, those are really important things. And especially as your non-exempt employees are working from home, there are regulatory requirements for meals and rest breaks, and, rest breaks are paid and so on and so forth. So again, taking a look at some of those things is really important. One big thing that employers are really concerned about is employee well-being. So social distancing really does not mean social isolation. So as you think about managers, in general, when we all are on site, we talk to our managers, we feel better. People walk by, they say, hey, how you doing? And then, you respond, and there's that sharing and all of that. So along those lines, managers should not forget showing empathy and understanding and recognizing the impact of isolation. In fact, I was speaking with a particular employer, and they were saying that, some of the employees really want to come back to work because they are by themselves in their apartment and they feel like they need to be in touch with, colleagues and coworkers. Again, staying connected. Even if you're not going to allow employees to come back to work, how do you stay connected? And again, our one technology that we're using today is Zoom, right? So we all are staying connected. And then most importantly, the employers really need to make sure that you're raising awareness, talking about all the technology and avenues available to employees, whether through telehealth or on-site, your employee assistance programs, make sure you're communicating about your wellness programs, your benefits, providing people with links and phone numbers and so on and so forth, so they can access things and, try to make life better for themselves. So if we move on to the next couple of slides, those are more leave behind. But what I thought would be helpful is to kind of give you a list of policies and procedures that I have seen a lot of employers relax and revise. So along those lines, create a list like this for yourself, for your own organization. What are some of your policies and procedures? And if things were informal, consider creating a formal policy. And then if we move on to the next slide, Terry, so, that's where, what are some of the next steps going to be for your organization? Obviously, the most important thing is to follow the law. And that for any organization, you make sure that you're following all of that. And then the big thing I am seeing these days is employers are evaluating their policies, practice, compliance, and business risk. They're looking at everything. They're looking at their people, their process, technology, and making sure that things are up to date, making sure employees and managers are trained, monitoring CDC and other guidelines because of things are changing as we speak. And then again, staying tuned for future updates. So, that's some of the things that I thought might be helpful to all of you.
Here, maybe if you go to the next slide, and Dan, maybe just briefly, if you could,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
talk about distress situations, and I will save a couple minutes for a few questions here.
Yeah, we've carried on, and maybe I carried on a little too much at the beginning. What we were thinking at the end was to start introducing the concepts of if there is distress, what the different, you might go back to the prior,
Yep.
If there is distress, what are you looking at? How do you plan? And there's, I'm not saying these are exclusive, but these are the predominant techniques that are used to deal with distressed acquisition structures. I think we're all fairly familiar with the asset acquisitions and otherwise. Foreclosure sales is more specific to certain assets. But as we go down, getting into the 363 bankruptcy sales and Chapter 11 plans, they obviously are available and probably will be utilized very frequently to deal with companies who just simply are not going to survive in this new environment. And so I think that's a topic for future discussion. And then we just wanted to share briefly with you, and it sort of depends, go to the next slide. I think this group looks for opportunities. So, how do you find these distressed businesses? And this slide is intended to at least give you some ideas. I don't think there's anything proprietary about this. I mean, you got to know your competitors. If you're in a strategic business, I think you'll find opportunities the best by talking within industry and talking with competitors, talking with professionals in the industry to find who may be interested in selling or not. In fact, I talked to a client recently who said he's getting frequent calls. They're just not ready to pull the trigger. But those with cash will have opportunities, and either vertically or horizontally. And it goes without saying, this group, other groups, you want to look at investment bankers, lenders, venture capitalists and other for information that may lead you to these opportunity. Talk to restructuring lawyers. They're probably, and accountants, they're probably best positioned to help you find and locate, as well as investment bankers, distressed businesses. And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to call someone, tell them you're interested, follow up with a mail, and then return calls. So it's just be proactive. There are opportunities out there. And so anyway, with that, I think we can go to the Q&A session.
Yeah, building on that, maybe, Steve, Dan introduced this concept. It seems like in the market today, there's two kind of groups of opportunities that are going to be out there. One, because of distress by companies, potentially portfolio companies looking to have to do a transaction. And then on the other side, there's true opportunities, people that might be well capitalized that are looking for opportunities in the market today. And maybe share some insights that you are seeing kind of across the region in that space, specifically in the private equity group space where, opportunities might be out there.
Yeah, it's interesting, and part of this is we're probably entering a territory where a lot of the funds are needing to think through and communicate with their LP groups, because a lot of the funds are actually prohibited, at least from a platform perspective, of going after businesses that are not that are having some kind of performance issue. So, I've talked to several funds that are actually actively thinking about how do they modify their operating agreements and their general agreements with their LPs to basically kind of change the targets they're allowed to pursue. Already have seen Article 9s. We've had a couple 363s. So we're beginning to see the deals that have hair on them. At the same time, we do a fair amount of sell side, and I'm beginning to see the sell side market come back to life. The interesting thing that I am seeing, though, is that there seems to be a sea change going on where strategics actually are going to be better positioned to buy companies just because they can capitalize without leverage, and the banking market has not caught back up, even with companies that actually are not don't have any distress. So you could have had a term sheet out on a business 3 months ago that had no performance change, and the bank basically is wanting to actually see a little bit more performance before they actually recommit to that. So that's where I think the strategics are actually going to be in a position to potentially be more aggressive, probably in at least the next 6 to 9 months. So. But it's still, it's very much a work in process. It's developing daily. So,
thanks. And Shushma, I might pivot back to you from a workplace, work environment standpoint. So if you had your crystal ball out and you're looking out 6 months, 12 months from now, what do you see as probably the major difference that you would forecast for the workplace of 2021 versus 2020?
So, that's a great question, and certainly nobody has a crystal ball, and certainly I don't. But I'll just tell you, like the early indicators, like even for me, in talking to employers, I thought people would just be grappling with blocking and tackling, but literally, I think this is kind of encouraging that a lot of employers are now seeing inefficiencies in what they're doing. So, for example, one employer I was working with, they grew through acquisition and merger, and they've got like 5, 6 platforms, and they let them be, and so on and so forth, right? And now what they're looking to do is they're looking to consolidate, they're looking to standardize, they're looking to optimize, they're looking to reduce costs. And I think everything that Dan and Steve said, that's basically generating this. And HR costs are, direct labor costs are pretty high. So even for payroll, just to give you one example, this particular employer, they had 5 different payrolls run every other week just because of the acquisition. One runs on Tuesday, one runs on Thursday, et cetera, et cetera. So along those lines, they're just trying to consolidate into one single pay frequency. And that just frees up so much bandwidth. So I think that we're going to see a lot of that, and especially automation, machine learning, artificial intelligence, like those are very, very prominent in the human capital management system. So we'll see more and more of that.
And maybe, again, I want to be respectful for our audience and their time. So maybe a final question, Dan, back to you would be, and Steve, if you have anything to add here, because you both kind of touched on this concept between distressed and non-distressed opportunities, and what does that look like? And so, Dan, from your standpoint, what's the key differences? If someone's going after an opportunity and it's distressed versus non-distressed, what would be the key decision points that they be thinking about? How would it look different between those two buckets?
I guess, first of all, just because they're distressed doesn't necessarily mean that they're not profitable. And so I think you have to do a full evaluation of how that particular target matches up with your strategic overall plan and how they enhance your fundamentals, whether they improve you vertically, horizontally, or provide a special asset or not. I wouldn't shy away from the distressed company over a financially healthy for that reason alone, because it may simply be that they're just over leveraged, and you can bring a different capital structure that will solve that for them and yet attain very, very valuable assets or very valuable operations. So I think the main thing is to stay true to your strategic vision, and then there are opportunities in each type of plan that you would just have to discuss with your professional.
I would add, and this is where I think we're going to see a change a little bit in the transaction market over the next 6 to 9 months. When you're a cash flow buyer, you're evaluating a company based on fairly stable cash flows, and you have a pretty decent idea what the net working capital structure of that business looks like. When you're buying a distressed asset, you actually oftentimes are acquiring companies that potentially have burn rates, and so you may evaluate a company that you need to actually forecast what the working capital erosion of that business is going to be for the next 6 to 12 months until you can actually stabilize the operations enough to basically take it from a negative to a positive, and that's really a different that fundamentally is a different way to evaluate a company. You're flipping from looking at income statement performance, which is how most cash flow deals are actually evaluated, to actually looking at the quality of the balance sheet itself and actually looking at what are the liquidity drains on the balance sheet going to be. So a lot of things are the same. A lot of things are significantly different as it relates to evaluating the deal. So.
We're going to let that be the final word. So with that, on behalf of our chapter, I want to thank Dan, Steve, and Shushma for joining us and sharing their insights from their respective positions in the market. Thanks also to their organizations for their longtime support of our chapter.